introduction, I represent the consulting side of Red Hat, but we also have a large part of the company is engineering and product focused, and we also have support teams, etc. So my experience is from how we approach the consulting part. I did speak to some of my colleagues in engineering just to see if there was a big difference to how they approach it, and we're fairly aligned in how we do things. So I'll give a bit of background in that, and then maybe people can ask me questions or maybe talk about some of the challenges that they see when they're trying to place graduates. And I can share my experience in that. So maybe by ways of introduction, I'm Jonathan Johnston. Most people call me JJ because it's much easier than trying to say the two together. I'm a past graduate of WIT. I'm not sure, can I claim to be a graduate of SETU, or is that up
You
here?
can, yeah, well, you can, Jonathan. Yeah, we'll allow you.
Yeah, so I've done a couple of courses in WIT. So I graduated from applied computing a long time ago now. I won't even say how many years ago. And I've been back to do a HDIP in business systems analysis. And a couple of years ago, I did the master's in information systems as well. So I've been back a few times. So I'm probably due another stint in another year or two. I've been at Red Hat for 6.5 years. So I joined Red Hat as a technical project manager. And then during that time, I took on some people management responsibilities, which meant I got involved in the hiring process, both for I suppose more senior consultants, and also getting involved in our grad intake process. And from previous jobs, I had some people management experience as well, where I would have been involved in the hiring process quite a bit. My current role in Red Hat is I'm service delivery manager for UK and Ireland. And that's basically our consulting organization. So any UK customers that purchase subscriptions in Red Hat products, if they need some expertise with how to get the best out of those products, or getting our guys to set them up and install them and build things on top of those products, they come to our consulting organization, and we either put consultants, maybe solo consultants on their own helping the customer, or we may put teams of people with specific product or technical experience into those customers to help them get the best out of that technology. So my role at the moment, I'm heavily involved in that. So shaping customer engagements, but then it's my role to make sure that we've the right balance of skills across those projects and customer engagements. So that means we're always looking at our capacity. We're always putting hiring plans together. So we would look for a balance between getting in early talent, so getting people onto our grad program and building up their Red Hat product knowledge, as well as some of the soft skills around that, to get them into a place where they can deliver on projects in the future. And then we also have like the immediate need where we need experienced consultants or architects that we need to get in and hit the ground running on engagements pretty quickly. So it's a broad, I suppose, spectrum of experience, skills, etc. that we're trying to find to be able to get those people delivering for customers. And the customers are paying a lot of money, so they've high expectations as well. So we usually need people that can get in there, that are good in front of the customer, as well as having the technical skills necessary to deliver the challenges or solve the problems that the customers present. I see Ian has joined us as well, so I see he gave us a wave there a few minutes ago. So in terms of graduate hiring in consulting, we tend to take all our graduates in through our graduate program. So that usually opens We do that intake once a year. Usually it opens up in January. We get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of CVs, where we spend a lot of time obviously working with our people team to whittle down those CVs into maybe 12 to 15 candidates that get selected to go to basically an assessment center. And in that assessment center, everybody always arrives thinking that they're going to be given technical problems to solve, or a technical exam or a technical interview. But when we get to that assessment center, we're really actually focusing on their other skills. So how do they work in a group? How do they problem solve? How do they present a problem or a story when they're put on the spot? And we don't delve a lot into their technical ability at that stage. We rely on the fact that they've just graduated from technical courses and have a technical background, and they've got through the screening process based what's on their CV and in the screening calls that they have. And really what we're looking for is their potential to work as a consultant in the future and work with teams of people and how they present themselves and solve problems. So it's the other skills aligned to what they've learned on their particular course, and the projects and maybe side projects that they've done over that time is what we're looking for in the consulting space. And then from talking to my engineering colleagues, they take most of their graduates in after they've been through an internship. So they rely on the internship, where they have people coming into the organization on work experience, and they tend to convert a lot of those internships into full-time positions. And again, similar to our area, they're not focused on technical interviews and testing their technical knowledge at that stage. It's more about, again, the other skills, problem solving, presenting, how they work with people. And again, they're relying on their background and education and the course that they've come from and the results and they've achieved in the projects they've completed, to assess their technical knowledge. And then as they progress through the internship, how they perform technically and interact with everybody, that decides whether they get offered a full-time position at the end of it or not. That's a very high level view of how we approach things. So I'm not sure if there's questions, or I'll shut up and let people quiz me if that works.
Yeah, Jonathan, maybe just even one. I know I have a few questions here. You mightn't have seen them in the email.
Sure.
But I suppose, say if a student contacts the Career Centre or any of the work placement directors, and they say, look, I've got a technical interview, what would you expect us maybe to say, or how to approach it?
Yeah, so I suppose the first thought I'd have is a technical interview can be quite a broad thing. So I would nearly look at, so what are the specifics of the job role? So when you say technical interview, is it for a Java programmer? Is it for a cloud consultant? So depending on what the role is, I would focus on that particular role. So say if it's for a Java programmer position, then focus in on that and make sure at a graduate level you're not expecting people to be the finished article, but you're expecting people to know the basics. So I suppose what I would advise them to do is focus in on what the requirements of the role are, pick out the specific technologies and skills that the position is asking for, and then make sure that you brush up and know the basics when you're going into that technical interview. And because usually it's probably going to be somebody pretty experienced in that area that's going to be interviewing the person. So again, they'll know the level that the person is coming in from. They don't expect them to know everything, but they would expect them to get the basics right at that level. So focus, make sure you understand the basics, and then go from there. The other thing I suppose I would add is if you are in that technical interview, again, the experienced person is expecting you to be a graduate. If they ask you a question that you don't understand or you don't know, don't try to blag it. I think it always comes across better if you just say you don't know, or that you don't understand the question and repeat it. But you're dealing with somebody that knows that area really, really well and has worked in it for years. So if you try to blag it or try to spoof it, they're going to know straight away. So I think it always comes across better just to say you don't know, or that you're not proficient in that area. I think it comes across better, especially in the consulting space, because we need people that are willing to be open and honest with customers, and sometimes have to tell them things they don't want to hear. So I always like it when somebody's willing to say they don't know something, or rather than just try to spoof it, if that makes sense.
Perfect. Has anyone any other question there? I know we'll go to Ian, or should we will we keep presenting, and then if there's questions at the end?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions in the chat,
Sure.
but maybe I don't know whether if we go to Ian and then we can kind of ask both. Would that work best?
Yep, that'll work fine for me.
That's great. And if either one of you think of something, just jump back in if it's triggered. You know, if Jonathan says something, it triggers something with you, Ian, and vice versa, feel free to. So, and thanks a million, Ian, appreciate it. You've always been loyal to AHECS members, turn up at different events, so appreciate that.
No problem. And look, it's funny, Jonathan, I think, you're talking about a consulting role in kind of that technical space, and that's kind of what we do as well. So you stole all my content essentially, but it's nice to see actually it overlaps so much. Even in your point about when you don't know something, like I don't ever see that as a problem during an interview. Like, this person's a grad, of course, like there might be things they don't know, but you can also flip that a little bit, that by showing enthusiasm and interest and curiosity about that topic, you can turn what could be a perceived negative for a grad saying, oh, this is a gap I have into. It's not a gap, it's actually just an area of development that if you show enthusiasm, and I've had some of the best interviews are we maybe spend 10 or 15 minutes explaining the concept to someone and having a really interesting conversation with them. So what could have just been a no, I don't know, becomes a, well, actually, can you talk about that a little bit? Because it sounds really interesting and I've never had a chance to see it. You know, it becomes a really positive experience. And I think in those consulting skills, that kind of ability to communicate, that, you know, curiosity, that ability to ask questions and understand things at a high level is really critical. But yeah, like, so I suppose it's funny. I think myself and Jonathan probably operate in very similar roles. So we're kind of leadership, or part of a leadership team for a consulting organization. So, you know, while Jonathan kind of works in Red Hat, I presume kind of a lot of, you know, Java based programs. We in Guidewire, we're a market leader in kind of core programs for the insurance industry, so worldwide. So core claim systems, policy systems, and billing systems for large complex insurers. But ultimately, we're looking for exactly the same thing. We're looking for tons and tons of potential. So we're not looking for the finished article, and in no way do we expect it. We're going to go into the interview, and there's going to be whole sections, and we don't have a script, but we have a whole set of collateral about how we interview. There's going to be whole sections that we might start off with something, and a candidate might say, I don't know that. And you're like, right, skip it. Like, what value is it for me to ask you something you've never heard of, for you to get worried and flustered, and then for me to see that? Of course, it's going to be a natural reaction. So we tend to kind of focus the interview on the areas that, first of all, we expect everyone to know, and there are some areas that we do expect everyone to know. And also then the things someone has done in college, the technical areas that they can kind of have on their CV and that we can talk about. So kind of just to reiterate what Jonathan said, if, you know your CV, be comfortable talking about what you've done. If you put down 3 or 4 things on your CV that you say you're very good at, you are going to get asked about them. You know, so just expect that. Now, if all you have is 3 or 4 things, that's absolutely fine. But if I see 7 or 8 things, I'm kind of immediately suspicious. And, you know, there's a very good chance that you're going to be asked and, you know, going to have to maybe give an answer that isn't the best. It's not a brilliant, you know, thing to do in an interview. The other thing I think that Jonathan said that really, really, really resonated with me was that idea of problem solving, and that idea of non-technical competencies and skill sets as being really critical. So we absolutely do expect a baseline level for people, and we do kind of, have a couple of different ways to evaluate that through kind of online code tests and kind of, online interviews and then an in-person interview. But as important to us is someone's core communication ability, their problem-solving ability. And I don't mean that in terms of how they write code. I mean it's how they analyze and parse a problem, how they talk about a problem, how they collaborate with their colleagues on a problem. Because a technical gap I can kind of fill in really easy with our graduate program. Through hands-on experience, you're going to learn loads of technical stuff in your first 12 months with Guidewire and with Red Hat as well. But what's much, much harder to fill in is someone who just doesn't have a great mindset for problem solving or can't demonstrate that mindset for problem solving during an interview. So we do put an awful lot of emphasis on that. So we do, we might start off with an abstract problem. We might talk about, okay, even something like string manipulation, like reverse a string and capitalize every vowel. Don't write any code, just list me the steps of how you do it. And then what we might do is layer complexity on that and say, okay, for a string that's 10 characters long, that's really easy. But what if it's a dictionary? What if it's, multiple dictionaries? What if it's half the books that have ever been written? Let's talk about performance here a little bit. And again, we're probably putting a grad in a slightly uncomfortable place because we wouldn't expect them to know this. But what we maybe want to see is how their mind works in something they haven't seen before. And I'm not expecting a perfect answer. What I'm expecting is a conversation. I'm expecting it to be like, okay, think about it a little, give me something, and just really get into the conversation with them and really kind of try and solve it collaboratively with them, because that's replicating how we work in our teams. Like, we are very collaborative. We'll mix and match people together. As Jonathan says, a big part of my job is kind of matching skill sets on projects and saying, okay, well, we have a grad, let's pair them with a good senior, a good lead, a good architect. Let's figure out which point the architect rolls off, and maybe someone can take on a little bit more responsibility. But that idea of collaboratively solving a problem and working on a team in a team environment is critical to what we do. So we, at every stage of the interview, try and reproduce that. So during every in-person interaction you have, be it over Microsoft Teams or Zoom or in person, it's going to be a conversation. It's going to be a collaborative process. It's not going to be, here's my 20 questions, get 17 of them and you get through to the next stage. Because really, I personally get nothing out of that. Like, what I get value out of is, okay, giving someone a situation they haven't seen before and seeing how they react to it, talking about what they've done in college and how they have learned from it, talking about both positive and negative experiences they've had. So maybe they've had a group project that didn't really function as well. That could be really good, because, like, how would you do it better next time? The failing isn't in not doing it right the first time, it's not learning from it. And again, exploring those a little bit and exploring kind of, how people have done that. Even, I suppose, for people who are maybe from non-traditional backgrounds that have come into college in a non-traditional way, like, I love people like that, because it gives them a completely different perspective, and they might have a whole skill set outside of, software development that we could leverage in terms of kind of leadership and responsibility, or just handling difficult situations. So things like this, I suppose, we really look to explore. So we do look at someone's CV before they come in, we look at their background, and we do tailor the interview to that to a certain extent. Like I said, there is kind of, I suppose, a level that you need people to hit, because we do have training, and they need to be at that level to pass the training. But outside of that, it's a huge amount on their personality, on their communication skills, on their ability to problem solve, on their ability to talk about failings, talk about learnings they've had throughout either their academic or wider career, and just be able to have a very good and proactive conversation with you about that. I don't know if I answered any questions there. I talked a lot.
No, that was good. But maybe I can throw in one or two questions just
I think that'd be good.
Coming up again. Can you use, Claire had just asked a question, could you use scenario-based questions in terms of technical questions and of the technical question? Does that make sense, what I'm saying there to you?
We do some, I suppose we use scenario-based questions around things like team project would be a really common one. Jonathan, I'm sure you probably asked the same thing, because they're probably sometimes the best example of kind of a complex dynamic environment with different personalities. Internships, and we obviously have our own internship program, and we look to hire all of those interns, but we meet people who've done internships elsewhere. And that can be a really interesting scenario. Like, how did you handle that? How did you handle going into a company that's running at 100 miles an hour with 1,000 people and being the new person? Because it's really, really, really hard, On the technical side, the scenario-based questions, like, we would probably, like, when we start off with a simple problem, maybe layer something like performance on top of that, or testing, or saying, okay, like, generally all our problems, because you want to solve them in a certain amount of time, are quite simple. So, like, string manipulation is a really common one, collection manipulation. And then, like I said, you might scale it up and say, well, if I had like 100,000 of these collections, if I suddenly had some like arbitrary restriction on me, how does that change it? So you'd probably change the scenario there a little bit, and that might almost be done on the fly in the interview by a very experienced interviewer, you know?
Yeah, I agree with what Ian has said there. Like there might be some like some of the scenario based questions are more likely to be around some of the other competencies. So example, like you know, talking about the final year project that you did, explain what the project was about, you know, how was it delivered? Was it a solo project, or were you working with other people? How did you handle situations where maybe somebody wasn't pulling their weight on the team? How did you approach that? And then maybe on the technical side, just add what Ian said, like a typical scenario based one we might ask a graduate is something around maybe troubleshooting or problem solving. But troubleshooting, for example, how would you debug an issue, or how would you research an issue? So, you know, recreate it, check the logs, etc., etc. So again, it wouldn't be anything too in depth, but sort of the examples we've just outlined there. I think you're on mute, Angela.
Sorry, yeah, Jonathan
No worries.
and Ian there. Joan was just asking, do you look at the final year project or just the mark? So I know you alluded to, do you ask him a little bit about it, but do you look at their project or maybe ask them to come in, or if it's...
Yeah, like I'd sometimes, if someone has a GitHub, I love looking at that. It's always nice to see. Like my last grad interview I did, we spent half an hour modeling out. So it was a chess. No, it wasn't chess. It was a Scrabble game. So we essentially spent half an hour modeling chess as objects on a whiteboard and the relationship between them. Or sorry, Scrabble, so like letters to positions on a board, to score, to words, to dynamics around, you know, those little blanks that you can put in whatever letter you want. And it might sound kind of boring. I thought it was a great conversation because it was really technical. It was really like abstract about taking this real world object and bringing it into kind of like almost like, you know, this OOP concept. So that was his final year project, and we spent a ton of time on that. So that was the bulk of the interview. Now, not every interview is going to be like that, but you can find out an awful lot about someone. And if I feel there's a wealth of information for me in a final year project, I really will dive into it, be that from a group context about how they operated. It might be some really interesting bespoke technology I haven't seen. I'm like, great, tell me all about this stuff. You know a hell of a lot more than me now. Like, spend 10 minutes and sell me on the idea of, you know, NoSQL databases and why they're brilliant. Like, that's fantastic. And again, coming back to, you know, the organizations and myself and Jonathan working, we're consultants. You know, this is a huge part of what we do. So seeing that in an interview is massive for me. It's hugely beneficial. So it certainly will come up, but then depending on the relevance, it may come up more than other people, I suppose. But in my mind, it'll always come up a little bit.
Yeah, I agree, Ian. It's one of the things that maybe sometimes I've noticed where some of the interviewees tend to skip over it a little bit, and I have to kind of drag them back and go, okay, this is an area I'm interested in, and it's more about, I suppose, one, I'm looking for their enthusiasm for the project as well, and how much they actually I suppose are into it and enjoyed it. But two, I'm interested in their ability to be able to explain it to me, because again, in the consulting industry, we spend a lot of our time explaining things to customers and explaining problems or explaining implementations or approaches to things. So I'm not overly concerned about the result as long as they passed it, but one is enthusiasm for what they did. Two is their ability to be able to explain it to me and be able to talk to me about it. And the other thing that it triggered was that sometimes I've seen students that have actually won awards for what they did with their final year projects, and they kind of skip over that bit as well. And I'm like, okay, let's go back. You've won an award here. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, they don't give these out to everyone.
Exactly.
Yeah, look, it's funny actually. I've kind of got the same, that some people almost a bit like, oh, you won't care about my final year project. It's really simple. You're like, no, that's all I care about. Like, you know, I'm in this room to talk to you, to find out about you. This is a huge body of work you did. Of course I'm relevant. And look, I get it. I would never judge a grad because of it. But yeah, it is funny sometimes. You do have to pull them back to this thing that they're a bit like, oh, no one cares about this. And you're like, I care about it a huge amount.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a good call on the code repositories, or like especially I suppose maybe if we take a step back from the actual interview, I think the biggest challenge is actually getting through the review of the CVs and the submissions. And again, like there, you know, we get a huge amount of submissions, and really having your CV tailored and concise and to the point is a big factor when people are wading through CVs. And what Ian just mentioned about having a link on there to any, you know, previous college projects or any kind of projects that maybe people are doing in their own time, and having a link to that repository where people can go in and have a look and see what the person's body of work is like is really beneficial. But you know, the actual CV itself, having kind of the core things that are relevant to the role called out, as well as anything like, you know, I like seeing what the final year project was, or any kind of interest they have outside of college, where maybe they've implemented even something like a website for a local community or a sports club and stuff. I love seeing things like that. And then any kind of awards or achievements, I think are good. Like it's like I mentioned, the amount of people that skip over that bit, and it's like, if people were giving me awards, I'd be shouting it from the rooftop. Like, so.
Just Jonathan there, I know Maria, sorry, had mentioned, do you use Git to see students' work, and what do you like to see? If you are looking at different repositories, which ones do you recommend, maybe, if it's okay to say that? And also, what do you look, you know, what do they look, what do you like to see in them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think there's any specific one that I would particularly recommend. I suppose really what I'm looking for is, I suppose, the person's overall what's the word I'm looking for? Their overall interest in the technology space, right? And you know that they've got an interest if they've got a code repository, because it means that they're probably doing a lot of stuff, and they're in that mindset of you know, keeping it in a centralized place and being able to share it with people. So already that gives me a view of the person, that hey, you know, this person is already in a kind of a professional mindset, if that's the correct word. You know, that they're already doing these things. So whatever type of repository it is, as long as they've got one, it helps. And then I just want to see what type of things that they're playing around with. Like, so again, you can get a feel for a person based on, hey, look, are they in there experimenting with different types of things all the time? Because if they are, that's the type of person I want in my team, because again, as a consultant, we spend a lot of our time doing proofs of concept, maybe playing with new technologies, where, like, you know, we need to stay a couple of steps ahead of the customers, because obviously they're paying first for expertise. So we need to be ahead of where they are, and somebody that already has that mindset is somebody that I'm already interested in.
Yeah, no, and 100% on that. Like, cannot stress that enthusiasm, that interest, that passion. And we've had candidates who it's pulled them through when we were a bit unsure. We just felt like, look, this personality is someone we need to have. And yeah, like their first 6 months might be really tough. They might have some gaps that are bigger than other people, and they're really going to have to work hard. But once they get to that stage, that's the person you want working with you. That's the person you want in front of your customers. That's the person you want on your teams, you know. And it's not to say that everyone has to be that like super outgoing person, because like we do understand there's different personality types, but I think showing passion for things you're interested in is pretty universal, you know.
And can I just ask, because there's another question Connor put in earlier on whiteboard coding tests, so I'll come back to that in a second, but just one thing, both of you have spoken about kind of showing your passion. How do we communicate that to the students? Because sometimes I say to them, look, the employer got the impression you weren't passionate about the role, but it's trying to get the students to understand what that means. Sometimes you might have a student who's quiet, but how they show their, you're kind of saying to them, look, I don't want you to change your personality, but I want you to be, if you're passionate about it, if you really like it, try and communicate that the best way you can.
Yeah.
Now, maybe I'm not articulating it.
No, look, I get the question, and it's hard. Like, so look, I'll give you an example, I suppose. So we had a guy who actually just started with us there 2 weeks ago that I interviewed. And he probably has a very different set of interests to me. So he was the guy who did the Scrabble thing with, but he's big into the NBA, and he's a pretty quiet guy, but he's big into the NBA. And he said during lockdown, he got big into this idea of stats on the NBA. So the NBA has this whole archive repository of stats about where you shoot on the court and who scores and percentages and how that relates to your tenure on the team and your height and everything. And I've half watched a basketball game my whole life. Like, I've known nothing about this, right? But I suppose he immediately kind of sucked me into this very interesting world around kind of like what this is. And he showed me that, like, the percentage chances of you scoring from certain positions. And as they implemented rule changes in the early 90s, the effect it had on scores in the games, which included the effect it had on how people, then rookies, viewed, prospects, and how it had on training in schools. And I was like, right, like, there's this whole story here. There's this whole kind of world that I knew nothing about, that small decisions made by administrators actually have massive, massive impacts across like a worldwide game. And again, like, I haven't since sat down and watched a basketball game. I don't know if I ever will, but it was during the time a really interesting conversation. Again, what I really liked about him was that he was really interested in this. And this is a quite niche, bespoke, small topic. And I thought, like, right, again, I really saw a sense of his personality, because up until that point, he had been quite quiet. He had been quite reserved. I'd been very professional, but I was a bit like, I don't know how much this guy kind of wants the job or is interested here. And suddenly, like, he kind of said this thing to him and his eyes lit up a little bit, and he just, we spent 15 minutes talking about this. So I think it's about finding that thing that you want. And it doesn't have to be like, I don't expect anyone to come into us and say, oh, I'm super passionate about core insurance systems. Like, I don't know if that sentence has ever been said in the world, like, and that's not what we want. Like, the job we do is really interesting, but I don't expect the grad in an interview to come in and fake that passion. But what I do want is them, like, and it could be that people come in and they talk about the sports they take on. They talk about, traveling that they've done. They talk about anything really. And I think from there, you kind of find avenues into their passions and interests that you can kind of look to kind of point to the career area, So I suppose, like, just kind of bring yourself to the interview a little bit, and don't be afraid to show your personality and, open yourself up a little bit, if you will. Like, again, and just from our point of view, and it kind of sounds like Red Hat's very much the same, like, we really appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it earlier, Ian. I was going to come back to it as well, is that especially for a graduate, like, we don't expect the person to come in and then we grill them and it's really tense kind of experience. To me, it's a conversation, right? So any of the best interviews I've ever done is where I've walked away and felt like I've just had a really good conversation with that person. And so I suppose the advice I would give is, tell them to relax, that it is just a conversation. What's the worst thing in the world that can happen is they don't get the job. So relax, come in, be prepared to have a conversation with somebody, and then that conversation could progress into something really good, or it doesn't, and you put it down to experience and you move on to another one. But we certainly don't grill people, and we want people to bring their personality. And Dean's point, there could be lots of things that person does that they may kind of disregard as something that we're not interested in, but like we want to see what the person is like. And I interviewed somebody a couple of years ago that has since moved into her engineering department and is doing really well. But again, the interview part, they were quite quiet. But then we're just having a conversation about some of their interests, and they mentioned that they were running some gaming societies in college, and that led to, tell me a bit more about that. And then it turned out that they were, in their own time, they were creating systems for scheduling gaming slots or organizing events. And it was like, okay, I haven't seen any of this on your CV, or I haven't seen any of these systems that you put together in your own time. So I suppose back to the point of maybe having a repository of those things, or calling out other interests outside of maybe IT, and having a conversation around that, we can find out quite a lot about the person. But like at a graduate level, we're really not getting deep into a technical grilling about the subject area. We're looking for, have they got the basics? Have they got the potential to grow and learn? And are they somebody that we see bringing something different to our team?
Yeah.
Great. And just to come back to Connor, sorry, Connor, you mentioned it earlier on, do you use whiteboard code tests or practical tests? And what's the best way for students to prepare for these? So either do you use the whiteboard coding tests or other practical tests?
We use the whiteboard kind of for more modeling. So like I said, we'll kind of model out a system on it. So like, a Scrabble system where we'll talk about relationships between objects, and it's like, boxes with arrows between them. And then I suppose our coding tests are kind of more on a laptop. We use a platform called Codility, which is kind of an online coding platform. So that's like, an IDE based in a browser, and we use that for both our automated tests as the first stage for interview, and then any subsequent interviews. Even if we're in person with someone, we kind of have a laptop and we'll kind of share that. But it is collaborative, that if I'm doing this with someone, I can see the code they write, they can see the code I write. And it's not about me necessarily judging their code. It's about me writing something, or even putting in something that's not great and having them pick up and iteratively move it better. So again, it'll always come back to the idea of collaboration. In terms of prepping, I think the coding stuff, like you're coding a lot, so I wouldn't say there's a ton of prep there. The whiteboarding, just maybe take an hour before the day or 2 days before your interview and just think of something you did on your project and just write it up on the whiteboard. If nothing else, it'll get you familiar with that. So if it does happen during a final round, and to a certain extent, some final rounds it happens more than others because there might be more stuff that you talk about that's relevant to it. But at least you won't be uncomfortable with it. So maybe think about, if I was to say to you, like, look, pick a complex project you worked on and just model out the objects and the relationships between them on the board, or the different elements and the relationships between them, and just do it. And if nothing else, the first time I ask you to do it won't be in the interview. You'll have done it before. Like that's bound to help. It certainly can't hurt.
Yeah, and maybe just add to that, maybe like still a lot of interviews, etc., are being conducted remotely still. So never a bad question to ask the hiring person that you're talking to what sort of whiteboarding tools are used in the company, and if it's Miro or Mural, to get familiar with them in case somebody asks you to do it virtually as well.
Very good. Just Jill had a question there about have you ever invited video CVs? Because she had just completed a course on universal design, which is aimed at making education and the workplace more accessible to everybody, instead of what we perceive as the typical learner-employer experience. Hope I've articulated that question okay.
Yeah, I have never received one, but I would certainly be open to it. Yeah. That person would automatically jump out to me as doing something different, so it would have piqued my interest straight away.
Yeah, look, again, I suppose we kind of, the vast majority of the CV we get in are kind of our traditional PDFs or Word docs. Although we are open to people with different abilities and backgrounds and differently abled, so like absolutely no problem at all.
And Joan was just asking there, do you give feedback automatically, or should is it on request?
We give it as a kind of matter of note. So anyone who gets to a final round with us will give feedback on. I think you can request feedback at earlier stages, but it's generally that final round which is the most intensive, which you're probably going to get very productive feedback from. So we will give feedback to everyone, actually regardless of positive or negative. So we will even hire people and say, here's a couple of areas we'd like you to work on when you start working with us. So like here's some good news, but here's a couple of things that we'd like you to focus on. And then we also sometimes kind of give feedback to people saying, look, it's a no, but it's more of a no for now than a no forever. So we have had people we say no to, and we loved your personality. There's a couple of core gaps in technical area. We'd like you to go study them. And if you want, come back to us in 6 months. We'll do a lighter touch interview on those specific areas and look to make a hire from that, So the no isn't always the door is shut. It's kind of like, we really like you, and we're encouraging you, and we'd love to see you come back,
Yeah, I'd echo that, Ian. So we would give feedback, and if I'm part of an interviewing panel, I am required to write up feedback. So if the person requests it, it's there and visible to them. But I would say, again, myself and Ian are only representing 2 organizations, but if people are in a situation where they've gone through the interview process and not heard anything back, I don't think there's anything wrong with picking up the phone or dropping an email and asking for the feedback. I think that's always a good thing as well. And then just to, at the point about, like, we do give feedback and people do go away and use that. Like, I think we've hired multiple people over the years that have maybe not got through the interview process at their first attempt, and in sometimes they've come back a second time and still not quite got it, but they've taken the feedback on board, and they've been hired at the third attempt sometimes. So nothing is ever a hard no if you take the feedback on board and work on the areas. You can always come back in the future and get a role or get a different role in the organization.
Perfect. Yep. That's great. And Tracy had a question: what information are graduates given before the interviews? Are they told who'll be interviewing them? Did they get details of the different, I suppose, potential phases of the recruitment process? I know it varies with different companies, but maybe your perspective, or your...
Yeah, we actually have a recruiter screen before every final round. We have a quick 15-minute call with a recruiter, and they talk about what to expect. Now, within reason, like, it's a dynamic environment, so there's going to be, like, you're not going to have here's the question you're going to be asked, but here's the areas of conversation. You also get given the names of people. So I have had people come in, and I've got a few kind of career recruiting videos and stuff out there, and be like, oh, I saw you on the video, and I'm like, oh my God, this is awful. So, like, things like that. Look, and it's actually, it's nothing else. It's a nice icebreaker, actually.
I always see myself being stalked on LinkedIn just before an interview as well. So somebody has viewed your profile.
See, my LinkedIn is awful. Like, I haven't updated it in about 5 years. So they're talking about stuff I did 6 or 7 years ago. I'm like, oh, it's all you're doing is showing how bad I am at keeping my profile. But I'm like, look, that's good. It's, again, it shows interest, it shows enthusiasm, it shows that you're professional, that you have that professional mindset. So yeah, you will get the names. I would encourage you to look up people, even look up what they do in the company if it's there. Again, depending on, it may or may not be. But they'll also introduce themselves during the interview. But you get the names of our interviewers before you go in, so it's useful to you. You also get the schedule of what you're going to do when, and what the day will look like, etc., etc.
Yeah, I think, Ian, your video that you've done for the Grad Ireland, the careers, we send that out on a regular basis.
Yeah,
I'm going to watch that video later this evening.
Yeah, we send it out to Jonathan. Yeah, but it does have. Just wonder maybe, and I see if there's any more questions below. Like, what is there any kind of recurring mistake you see when students are turning up for interview? Like, what's the one that, oh my God,
I think I mentioned previously about maybe glossing over the final year project and maybe some of their achievements, maybe not giving enough importance to that stuff. The big one I would see sometimes is not understanding the role that they've applied for. So, and I think I mentioned it earlier as well, like, take the time to read through the job spec and understand what's required of the role. And even when you have that first contact with the TA team, don't be afraid to quiz them about it and ask them more questions and things like that. Again, that won't come across badly. That comes across as somebody that's inquisitive and wants to understand what they're applying for. So, and then if there's, like I said, if there's some key responsibilities or skills required for the role, making sure that you have the basics. I can't emphasize that enough, that you have the basics of those particular skills, and then anything else on top of that is a bonus. But yeah, I would say not understanding the actual role that they've applied for, or maybe done some background digging about the actual company and understanding what the company does. They're the kind of things that I think pop up quite frequently.
Yeah, definitely on the company. And, like, you don't have to have an encyclopedic knowledge, but, like, know what you do, know what the company does, because it's a very poor start to an interview, and it's hard to mentally recover from it as an interviewer when you're like, this guy does or this girl doesn't even know what we do. And it's like I said, it's not tons of information. It's just enough to kind of start that conversation. And then, like, you know, enough to also, I saw you do XYZ. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Again, turn it into a positive, show enthusiasm, curiosity.
Right. And is there any other, like, what would be your one piece of advice you'd give, or that you've learned yourself, or?
Like I said, I would say just like, and I know it's cliched, and it is super cliched. It's bring yourself to the interview. Like, you know, we like all different types of people. We like, you know, we are a consulting org, so you could say, okay, well, they like button down professionals who keep their emotions under wraps, and that's not true. Like, we like people who can bring themselves. We like different dynamics in teams. Like, you know, I interviewed a very unique girl the other day, and we ended up hiring her just because she had a really, you know, interesting perspective on things, and she just had a very different outlook on things than I would have. And I think that's great to have in a team. So again, it's like, you know, don't be afraid to kind of bring whoever you are to work, to talk about what drives you, what your passions are, what your interests are. You know, don't assume we want a certain type of person.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And usually, you know, what we are looking for is somebody that brings something different, that kind of challenges the norm of the team. And so, yeah, definitely bring your own personality, because that's the personality. If you end up in the company for the next 10 years, you know, we want to see who the actual person is. And the second thing I'd say is, don't get too hung up if you don't get the job. You know, again, put it down to experience, look for the feedback, learn from the feedback, and go again. And, you know, especially when I finished college, I had tons of rejection, and, you know, you just have to, you know, put it to one side. The right opportunity will present itself eventually. So, you know, don't get too caught up if it doesn't go so well, or you don't get the role. Just learn from the experience.
Perfect. So I know I think I've gone through all the questions in the chat, which is great. If there's anybody else who wants to jump on, Ian and Jonathan, you have a great turnout for, I think it's the highest one we've had, is about 19 people on the call. So that's fantastic. So we've work placement directors, some academics, and people who are working with the students. So I really appreciate that. So if there's anybody else has some questions, feel free to jump on. Again, just for those who might have joined a bit later, Jonathan is from Red Hat and Ian is from Guidewire. We're all a bit like the students now. We won't ask questions at the end.
I'm going to take it that our presentation, myself and John, has been so good, there are no questions.
Well, as Jill said, there was fab. So there's loads of, you know, good stuff coming in. And again, I suppose just for us, we're constantly being challenged. You know, the recruitment process is changing. So for ourselves, it is good that we kind of keep an eye on best practice. And, you know, if there is anything you'd like to share with us, feel free to reach out to us. As I say, Jonathan has been very supportive to us. I've reached out to Jonathan a few times, and again, Ian, you've always been very supportive on a national level as well, turning up, and it has been very helpful. You know, I like to say for myself, I'm a careers practitioner for all faculties, so it is just good every now and again to kind of see what's best practice in different areas. So thanks a million. Or if there's anything we can support both of you, your organizations as well, we'll be delighted to help. You know, it was very practical, useful information, as Tracy said there, and there's probably more comments coming in. Again, thanks for the insights, very helpful. Really appreciate it. So, you know, it is helping us, I suppose, to do our jobs better. So, you know, thanks for giving up your time. I know it's a busy time, and apologies. We had 2 more speakers, but due to illness, have just kind of cancelled the last minute. So I'm sorry about that.
No problem.
Thanks very much.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Happy to help. And look, I think Ian would probably agree, the biggest challenge we have in the industry at the moment is trying to attract talent and trying to retain talent. So all the work that you all put into the students and creating good graduates for us, it makes our lives a hell of a lot easier. So anything that we can do to help, or if you need advice on anything, or need us to get involved in anything, and I'm saying us, so I'm talking for Ian as well. You know, feel free to reach out.
I'll be looking for one of those red hats in the background and the t-shirt.
No worries, I'll hook you up,
Do they
Angela.
give them out as a matter of like you have to kind of earn them in some way?
Well, you get them, you get them when you join and are onboarded, but for some reason mine got lost in the post somewhere. So I was kind of like, does this mean I'm failing probation that I haven't got mine yet? Like, so it eventually arrived. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but again, really appreciated. I don't know, does anyone else want to say anything before I let the guys go? But you know, the feedback from the people is just excellent there. They're really appreciated. So thanks very much.
Angela, sorry. Oh,
sorry, Tracy. Yeah.
Sorry, no, I just want to say it was really, really good information. I find from the students' perspective, I deal with work placement, so I mostly know about the work placement interviews, but I do any of them that I kind of get to know well enough to poke at them a little bit. I start asking them at the final year projects fair, you know, what's the story with grad jobs and what do you think of the interviews and the process? And I'm always surprised by even the really good students, like all of the students, regardless, even the ones who are getting firsts, they're very nervous. They feel like it's very high stakes. And then they, you know, so going, even just thinking about the process makes them come out in hives.
Yeah.
So, and I think the less, if there's anything industry can do to make the process more transparent and less surprising, I think it helps dispel the nerves a lot. So that idea of giving them a schedule of, you know, these are the phases of the graduate program, the recruitment process. So this is what phase 1 will look like. And if you get through that, little things like that make them feel more that, not that they're in control, but they know what's coming, as opposed to constantly guessing as to what's coming. And it doesn't get rid of nerves completely, but I think it helps, you know, and because they are very keen to do well and, you know, get the jobs, and sometimes their nerves can just take the good out of that a bit, I think.
Yeah, look, I'm sure, like, I've seen candidates that are like, you walk out of the room and say, there's a better version of that person, and like it kind of heartbreaking, because ultimately, like, you do have to kind of make that decision in the time what you saw. There's an allowance given, but there's only so much allowance.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like I said, I think, you know, certainly anything we can do to help with that, but also I think that message about, like, don't be afraid to be yourself. Don't assume that a candidate, you know, we want a candidate to be a certain thing or act a certain way. Like, you know, we kind of I quite like working candidates. I like candidates who come in and are very different to me, who challenge me on things, who think about things and talk about things in a very different way. There's also a generational part as well, that I'm far from a grad now, so I quite like that attitude. Someone comes in and they have a very different perspective on kind of what I would see as an established norm, and I love that. And I think it's really important for growth of our organization. So, you know, don't be afraid to do that. Like, it's the how you do it, but don't be afraid to do it. And look, that can be hard as a grad to do. You know, it is high stakes. It really matters, and it's the higher the stakes, the more you probably go into yourself a little bit. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, but I mean, things like this I think are very good, because we get insight. Like, we hear what the students are saying, but it's great to get insight in a forum like this that's very it's not slides so much as just conversation and questions. So I certainly got an awful lot from it, and I'll be trying to feed that back to the students as best I can. So thanks.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much. Conscious of time, we might close it off there if that's okay, but thanks so much. Really appreciate it. And thanks, Angela, for organising the speakers as well. It's great.
And thanks, Maura. So thanks, everybody. Have a great Christmas, and
yes,
keep safe and keep warm. So thanks very much. And thanks, Jonathan, and thanks, Ian. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you all.